Welcome to the Law School Toolbox podcast. Today, we're excited to have ex-BigLaw recruiter Sadie Jones here with us to talk about business development. Your Law School Toolbox host today is Allison Monahan, and typically I'm with Lee Burgess. We're here to demystify the law school and early legal career experience so that you'll be the best law student and lawyer you can be. Together, we're the co-creators of the Law School Toolbox, the Bar Exam Toolbox, and the career-related website, Career Dicta. I also run the Girls Guide to Law School. If you enjoy the show, please leave a review on your favorite listening app. And if you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out to us. You can always reach us via the contact form on lawschooltoolbox.com, and we would love to hear from you. With that, let's get started. Welcome back to the Law School Toolbox podcast. Today, we're excited to have ex-BigLaw recruiter Sadie Jones here with us to talk about business development, something you should probably consider from your early days of law school if you want to work in a law firm. So welcome, Sadie.
Thanks for having me back.
My pleasure. Well, to start us off, what does quote-unquote business development even mean in a law firm context, and why is it at all relevant to young associates or law students?
Basically, I think it means anything related to clients. So it doesn't necessarily mean, you find somebody and bring them into the law firm. It's just any relationships that you have that could lead to business down the road or work somewhere that, the law firm might have business with. So I think of it as sort of a broad term. And I think that it's just an important skill to develop, early on, because you're going to sort of build on it. You're not just going to bring in a client from the beginning. You're going to work on these relationships, and eventually, people will move up in the same way you're going to move up.
Right. Theoretically, at least.
Yeah.
Well, when firms are thinking about sort of the potential people might have for business development, what are they really looking for?
I think they're looking for people who, are able to kind of have relationships with other people, can, be social. I don't think that's the only type of business development, but I think generally they're kind of looking at people skills. And I think they're looking at, are you thinking about this early? Like, is it something you're working on? Are you, going to events? Are you keeping up with people? Are you having lunches? That kind of thing. Sometimes, these skills might be developed outside of a client relationship. So maybe, you're trying to build relationships inside the firm. I think they can kind of tell the people who early on are, kind of headed in that direction.
Right. I mean, obviously, it's pretty unlikely a summer or first year is going to bring business directly into a law firm. I mean, that doesn't seem like a particularly reasonable expectation for people to put on themselves. So how can people kind of demonstrate their potential in this area, assuming they don't have clients who they can just bring into the firm?
Demonstrate it, you mean to other people at the law firm?
Right. What kind of stuff can I do to show, like, okay, I'm a person who understands this is important and I want to get better at it, and I want to show you that, I understand that this matters?
Well, first of all, I'd ask questions of, the partners, the more senior associates that you're working with, even as a summer associate. I would ask them about this topic. If there's anything kind of offered at the firm in this area, you, even as a summer associate, can listen in on calls, potentially go to events, all of those kind of things. So I think just kind of asking questions and wanting to be involved and seeming interested, I think, is sort of the place to start.
Yeah, I was always surprised when, as an associate or even as a summer, we might get invited to something that a partner was organizing or clearly mattered to them. Oftentimes it would be a dinner or something of, say, some organization they were involved in. And they'd say, hey, who wants to come and sit at the table with us and go to this thing? And it was always surprising how many people did not do that, because I thought that seemed like a pretty important thing to do.
I was going to say that is a job that I've had in the past, is filling those tables. And a lot of times they're like really good speakers. It might be at a nice place. I know that these things can get old pretty quick. But I definitely think that kind of stuff is important. And, if a partner can't fill a table, that looks bad for them. And I think they notice, even if you're really junior, even if you're a summer associate, that you kind of show up. And seem interested. A lot of times they're getting these tables on behalf of a client because a client requests, their involvement in something. So you should know all of that. But absolutely, it's really hard to fill those tables, and you stand out if you kind of show up.
Yeah, it just seemed like a really easy way to curry favor with people, basically. I was like, well, okay, it's going to take me a few hours. I'll have to put on maybe a slightly nicer outfit, but it's right after work. I'll just go have dinner. Maybe I'll meet some people. If nothing else, I'm making nice with this partner who probably is happy that they don't have to worry about filling the table anymore.
100%. I think that a lot of times just early on, people don't think about it. They're not thinking about the bigger picture of what this is. They're just thinking, I don't really feel like going to that event tonight.
Right. It's not billable time if you're an associate, which matters. But also, I feel like if you go to a few of these, you start to see the same people over and over again because they're probably the go-getters. And so, eventually you're like, oh, hey, we met at last month's judges dinner. How have you been? So you start to actually build these relationships. And that's kind of the point.
Definitely. And people inside the firm will notice if you're, showing up. Also, a lot of them you get CLE credit for.
True.
So that's always good once you're, an associate.
I can tell you've had to sell these to people before.
I have. But I genuinely think it's a good opportunity for people.
No, I agree. I mean, I always found generally they were interesting. And if nothing else, you saw people, I always ran into people I knew from law school at them, all these kind of things. This is kind of this is one aspect of business development is you got to be out there, seeing your people.
Absolutely. And I'm coming from the perspective of I have had to fill the seats sometimes. So I've personally had to go to some of these. And I don't know, that they've been interesting.
Yeah. I mean, people are busy, but I feel like this is pretty good bang for your buck for something that literally just requires you to show up for a couple of hours and not say anything offensive, basically.
And they're a set amount of time. They're usually a structured event. So how long you're going to be there, where they are, all of that kind of thing.
Right. Well, what if someone's listening to this and they're like, this sounds really terrible. I just want to be a lawyer and do my work and go home. Is that a problem?
That's just a different track. So I think there absolutely is a track for people who aren't interested in business development. That there are roles at a law firm where business development is not really going to be required. On the other hand, everyone at a law firm most likely is dealing with clients on some front. So I would say, if you're more of an introvert and this all sounds really far out of your comfort zone, I would at least kind of dip your toe in and try to develop some of the skills. You don't have to be, the schmoozing partner in the end, but I would just be able to, sort of deal with clients on some level. But there are roles where that's not really going to be part of your job.
Right. I think the harsh reality, though, is those roles are not partner roles.
Absolutely not. But I actually think those roles can be really great for the right person and in certain ways can be kind of more job security. So you're going to make less money and it's going to be a different kind of more of a helper role. But for the right person, those are great opportunities. I just think that these skills are good to push yourself at if we're talking about early on. So I wouldn't just say that's not for me. I'm an introvert. I don't like talking to people.
Right. I think people just have to sort of understand the business model of a law firm and what type of people are being promoted to partner and that kind of thing, if that's a path that you want. And no one's saying you have to go aspire to be a law firm partner. I mean, I certainly didn't at some point. That's why I left the law firm. But, I think sometimes students have, a very unrealistic idea of what it requires, I guess, to become a partner at most law firms. Do you think that's true?
I think that's absolutely true.
Yeah, I think people have this idea if I show up and I do good work, then I'll just magically get promoted to partner. And, maybe several generations ago, that's kind of how this worked. But now, if you're not bringing in a certain amount of business by the time, these things are being looked at or have high potential to do that, you're unlikely to become a partner.
Yeah, I think people kind of think that just doing good work is the way to get ahead because that's kind of how it's worked so far. Right. As a student, you do well, you move ahead. But if you think about it, relationships always matter and your relationships with your professors matter and, and other activities you're in.
Well, let's talk a little bit about what law students can do when they're in school to start building these skills, whether that's honing traits they already have or really kind of pushing themselves outside of their comfort zone. What are some ideas you have on that?
I think, attending events, I think relationships just with your classmates are a good place to start, because those are the people that are all, going to be working places that you're going to want to have those relationships with down the road. Being in clubs, being in activities is helpful as well. And some of those activities, have relationships with law firms and, outside employers. So I think basically just building the skills to develop relationships with people and kind of get comfortable going to events, that kind of thing.
I think this is particularly important maybe for people who haven't worked in a professional environment before, to really start that professional networking, which is probably different than like hanging out with your friends in college and that kind of thing. But I mean, isn't this really just kind of the same as networking? And do you think introverts can be successful here?
I think it basically is the same as networking, and everybody has a different definition of what that means. So it's not the same for everyone. And I think introverts can be successful at this. There's not one way to network or talk to people, and not everything needs to be at a big event. You can have a personal one-on-one relationship with people, and sometimes introverts are a lot better at like the deeper relationships, and making those connections. So I don't think you should just count yourself out because you're not like an extrovert, life of the party sort of person.
Right. And I think more and more, firms, particularly women partners and things, are doing much more intimate scale events and things like that as part of their client building, because they realize like it's not necessarily fun for people just to go to some loud dinner party or something. Maybe people would like to get their nails done or like have a cooking class, something that actually sounds fun. But there's no reason that if that sounds fun to you, you can't put that type of event together.
Absolutely. I think that if you're interested in it, there's going to be other people that are like you. Not everyone, wants the same type of thing. Yeah, so find the people that you connect with.
Yeah, like a crowded football or baseball game, like for networking is not my idea of fun, but for other people it is. And that's cool. Like they can do that. But there are other things that I would rather do.
Or even like a, cocktail party kind of traditional thing. That's not necessarily for everyone either.
Right. Yeah. And I think more and more, hopefully at least, firms are kind of opening up their idea of what like a networking event for their clients and associates and summer associates and all that can even look like. Maybe you do an event together, maybe you do a volunteer thing together. I think they're expanding beyond just like drinking, the classic like go to a strip club, like, that sort of thing just doesn't really fly.
Definitely. And I think just with how things have been this year with so much kind of virtual stuff, there are like lots of different ways to do things. And some of that stuff can be easier for introverts too. And I think it'll still exist.
Yeah, I think people just have a broader conception now. And really, like you said earlier, this is all about relationships. So, I think if you're a law student, you just want to be thinking about building relationships with your classmates, with your professors, with people in the legal community, and not building a reputation as someone that they would not want to do business with.
Exactly.
All right, well, let's switch gears a little bit. Lots of lawyers actually end up going solo, which I think a lot of law students don't fully appreciate. Statistics I think I saw recently, more than half of the practicing attorneys are either solos or like very small firms. Do you think students should be thinking about this as an option? And, how does this play in if they really hate the idea of doing business development?
So I think this is a really tough option. And some people sort of think it'll be an easier path for some reason. Business development is going to be huge here. It's going to be a lot of pressure on you. Now, there may be a situation where you're like teaming up with a classmate or another person, and maybe they're more the business development person and you're more, the worker. But if you want to be a solo practitioner, you better start these skills early, because it's going to be all on you to be able to, pay your bills.
You're literally running the business.
Yeah. So it's not, even if, let's say that you start it thinking, you already have a client or something and that's why you're starting it, you can't count on that. Like, this is a long, hard road.
Yeah, I think the idea of going solo straight out of law school, although some people do it, obviously, is like very difficult. I think, the more common path is someone gets some experience and then for whatever reason they decide that they want to go out on their own. It's funny how many people kind of don't necessarily think about that as becoming an entrepreneur, which is very different from like the experience of practicing law. But, it's definitely something that you can do. Lots of people do it, like we said. But I agree, like if you think this is any possibility of being in your future, you definitely want to start thinking about these ideas now. I mean, certainly if you told me in law school I would be running a business, I would have thought that was laughable. But when I started thinking about it, I realized like, oh, okay, there's a lot of stuff I actually need to learn about here. And so I think, the earlier you can start thinking about those things, probably the better.
Absolutely. I actually think that there's no path that you're going to take where these skills won't come in handy somewhere along the way. So I would, just start thinking about it as a law student. Whether or not you think it's like your path long term, these skills will be useful.
Yeah, and I think, it's funny. I think the relationship between like the marketing department in a law firm and like the lawyers, I don't know, in your experience, in my experience, that was always sort of I don't want to say treacherous, but complicated relationship might be fair to say.
Definitely, because I think that lawyers just don't really think that way. So I think, talking to the marketing department, figuring out how they're doing these pitches is a good idea.
Yeah, I mean, that's actually a great point. I mean, even as an associate, I would basically sometimes have to be brought in on pitches because, I don't know if people listening is really understand this, but, law firms go out and they actually like, for example, I was doing patent litigation and there would be somebody get sued, some big client that we've worked with before or small company or whatever, but they basically bring in really teams of lawyers. And so to go to the pitch, you have to essentially do an analysis of their case. And so, obviously the partner's like, great, who do we have to do this? Bring in some associates, like have them write this document, do a bunch of slides. It was a very intense process, actually. You would spend a few days like very deeply involved in this. And then oftentimes would actually go to the meeting where, there'd be teams of lawyers exiting the room and teams of the next firm's lawyers coming in. And essentially you're there to talk to the client about like, well, this is how we see the case. Like, this is how we think we would proceed. Do you want to work with us, et cetera. And they were quite interesting.
Yeah, and I think that's just an area that isn't really taught to law students.
Oh, I had no idea.
Yeah, and I think it's just, you don't think that way. It's just a different, way of kind of thinking about everything. And they're more thinking of the legal work and not how you're pitching the business. So I think that's just a great experience. And I think even as a summer associate, you can definitely get involved and show, interest, that kind of thing.
Yeah, it was always interesting. So we sort of like, why am I along on this? I'm like, oh, right, because they like the fact that like I was a programmer and I'm also a woman. And oh, yeah, right. Okay, check. That's why I'm being brought along on this.
Exactly. Like I think that may happen, but I also think it's like great experience. And so for whatever reason you're in the room, like, absorb it and figure out what's going on.
Yeah, I just thought it was pretty interesting. I think generally any type of learning about ideas of marketing and selling, I mean, these are all like dirty words usually to lawyers. Again, like when I decided to launch a business, I had to read a bunch of stuff about like, how do you sell things? How do you market things? And these are not necessarily like, a slimy type of thing. I think Seth Godin is really good on this. If people are interested, he's kind of a classic, but his point is really, marketing is not like a dirty word. It's basically just trying to figure out what you do and who you help and then find those people and help them. So, lawyers are like, it's so terrible. But I don't think that's really true. I think it's a useful thing to understand.
I completely agree.
All right. And so if we're thinking before we wrap up about, law school activities, we've kind of touched on this. It might be good for business development. I think any type of like club or thing like that where you're meeting people, particularly we've talked about this before, you can be in like a leadership role. I think any type of leadership type of roles are always useful. And, some people may have to push themselves, but, law school is a good time to push yourself to do something that's very low stakes that could help you learn a skill.
I agree. I think just getting involved in something and, like you said, taking some kind of role. It doesn't have to be the main person, but just some kind of role where you're developing relationships, you're being a leader. I think pushing yourself outside of your comfort zone. I don't know if it matters which activity exactly. I think it kind of could be anything that you're interested in.
Right. And it doesn't even have to be stuff in the law school. I mean, I think sometimes people can get in this silo of like, oh, I just have to, if I develop this relationship with this judge, like then my life will be set. That's not really what we're talking about. Business development type things are actually mostly outside of kind of the strict legal world. So like one thing that I did in law school, which I thought was fun and also probably helped me meet other people, was I took a bunch of classes at the gym. So I signed up for squash class, for example. And basically the people who play squash, as it turns out, are like lawyers and business people. So the class was basically like half lawyers, half MBA students, and then like a smattering of other people who had, come from squash countries like India or something. But it was actually quite fun. We all became friends. Like it made me meet people outside of just the limited school universe. So I think something along those lines, whether it's like a dance class or acting, improv, like anything that gets you out of kind of that law school bubble and lets you meet other people could actually be really beneficial. A, for practice, talking to people who are not lawyers, and B, because you never know who you might meet.
I agree. I think, and also it's just putting you outside of your comfort zone, kind of like trying something new. And I think networking, these relationships can kind of apply to so many different things. Just kind of like, do something that sounds interesting.
Right. Because ultimately, a lot of this is really about finding, the fit between what you find interesting and what you want to do with your life and like spend your time doing and what other similar people want. So, if you're really into sports, then like, great, you can be the person who goes to every single baseball game that, oftentimes firms have like boxes of these things or season tickets. And I'm guessing that's kind of like the table. Like it's kind of hard to give away those like every day, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, I know this because I've been invited along when I wasn't working in a firm for other people's baseball games that they couldn't give the tickets away to. But, I think whatever you're into, there are probably other people who are interested in it. And it's just really a question of finding that fit. I mean, the other idea of, the sort of piece of business development is it's really about maintaining relationships as well. So, you want to make sure that you're a person that can be trusted around a client and that kind of thing, because ultimately, most of the business of a firm really probably comes from their existing clients, I would guess anyway, more than people they just kind of pick up on the street. Do you think that's right?
I think that's definitely right.
Yeah, so I think one of the key things is like you don't want to be that person that they're afraid to have be around a client. Like and I guess
and I think those are the things they're looking at just for regular summer associate events. Like that's what's in the back of their head. Like, how are you just in a social situation? So that's what we've talked about before, just like that you don't have too many drinks and that you can kind of chat with different people and, stay away from those sort of hot button issues. So all of those things, they are thinking about what you'd be like, with a client.
Right. Because, the client relationship really is like, who is the client working with? Who are they comfortable with? Could I send this person out to supervise something on site? A lot of what you're doing ends up being related to the client or the people who work for the clients. When I was a patent litigator, I had relationships with like engineers, for example, and like I would call them up or they would have questions, that kind of thing. And like that in an indirect way, at least, was developing that business because I needed to be a person that the partners could trust to like talk to those people because, if I don't know what I'm talking about, and I say something completely stupid, like obviously they're going to go to their boss, who is the in-house counsel, and be like, well, it doesn't sound like Allison was like really up to speed on this. I'm not sure we trust her. And that is not the way to develop more business with that particular client.
Definitely. And I would say, if you are as a summer associate or junior associate involved directly with clients, make sure that you're clear what the partner or senior associate is expecting from you. Whether you're just there to listen or they expect you to contribute, I think it'd be good to, figure that out so you sort of know your role.
Oh, absolutely. That's a great point because there's nothing worse than like a junior person going totally off script and like the client, say that the in-house counsel, like I got calls from like people who were in-house counsel, like major companies because they had a question for me, right? And like they knew that I was a person who would have this information. So they call me up and they ask the question. Well, that can go a lot of different ways, And one way it should not go is that they start asking me things I don't really know about or I'm not really sure about or like about case strategy and I just start pontificating about it.
Yeah.
Like that's not going to end well.
And a lot of times you may just be there to take notes and listen. So you should know if that's your role because you also don't want to not be taking notes. I mean, you should be taking notes anyway. But you just want to know like how they sort of see you there. And I agree, you definitely don't want to go off script.
Yeah, you just really don't want to overstep your bounds. So, if the client calls me because they're like, we need like, a line citation to this thing in this deposition, do you have that? And I'm like, yep, here you go. That is totally fine. They're going to be happy about that. If they then say, well, what do you think about this motion we're about to file? That is probably not a question I should answer.
Yeah, that's a point where you want to say, maybe turn it over to somebody else, right, or you will find out and get back to them.
Yeah, like, oh, that's such a great question. Like, I think it's going well. Like, let me have, the partner call you back to talk about that.
Yeah, you should probably have some of those phrases kind of in the back of your head, how you're going to, not answer the question and figure it out.
Right, exactly. Because you don't want to be, if you're the low person, you're the first year associate, like, that's, they're probably just not thinking and probably not intentionally testing you. Maybe they are, but, mostly they're just probably not really thinking about it. And of course, as soon as you say like, oh, let me have, the partner call you back, they're like, oh, right, of course, that makes sense.
Exactly. I will say that even though, most likely you're not going to be, like we've said, bringing in business from the beginning, or that's not how we're sort of thinking about it. We're talking about building skills. There are situations where you may know someone who is someone important somewhere else. And these days, a lot of younger people are, having successful startups and, in important roles inside companies. So I also wouldn't assume that you won't know somebody who has, an important role, even when you're junior. So don't like discount it either, is what I'd say.
No, I think that's a great point. I think it's important to know kind of what your firm does, which sounds obvious, but if you're working at a large firm, you might not even be aware of exactly like, what the focus is or what different departments are doing or are capable of doing. And so this is kind of an ear to the ground type of thing. If you are talking to like your college buddies and one of them says like, oh yeah, I've got this like legal issue with my company, be thinking like, oh, I wonder if this is something we could help with. Like, but you have to kind of have a basic understanding of what type of work the firm even does.
Definitely, because kind of mismatching that stuff is not going to make you look good.
Right. Does your firm have a trust and estates department? Like that kind of thing before you offer to help.
Exactly.
All right. Well, we're running out of time here. Any final thoughts you have on this?
I would keep up on your LinkedIn is sort of my final thought, because you never know where people end up. And so, that's a good way to kind of keep these relationships and see where people are and that kind of thing. So just generally, keep updated on it. It's kind of the best place, I think, to, see the business side of this.
I think that's a good point. A lot of people, I'm probably guilty of this, sort of set it up and then never look at it again and never really, I get a lot of people request to, LinkedIn friend me and, connect with me. And I'm like, great, cool. But I don't really use it. But I'm also not a lawyer. So, no, I think that's a great sort of idea. I think it definitely is where people hang out with their professional network. And I think any type of school events and things just to maintain contact, alumni stuff, like, these are happening all over the place. A lot of them are virtual now, but just kind of being in that mix, if this is something that you think you're going to need to do, I think can only benefit you.
Exactly, because people say to me all the time, I don't know anyone.
Right. Like,
or
really?
I don't have any connections. And I'm like, I bet you do.
Yeah, you probably do. Like, you went to school, you went to law school. Like, those are already a lot of people. You have an outside life. Like, people. And obviously some people, are better at maintaining connections than others. But we all know people.
Exactly. So it's just about kind of figuring out where they are. So, keep up on it.
Yeah, and I think, maintaining that network before you're going to try to kind of employ it is better than trying to build it from scratch like a decade out of school when you've lost contact with everyone.
Exactly. This is going to make things easier if you kind of do a little bit at a time.
Definitely. And just get curious about it. What is it like to sell things? Like, that's actually a good thing to kind of understand. All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. With that, we are out of time. For more career help and the opportunity to work one-on-one with us, you can check out careerdicta.com. If you enjoyed this episode of the Law School Toolbox podcast, please take a second to leave a review and rating on your favorite listening app. We would really appreciate it. And be sure to subscribe so you don't miss anything. If you have any questions or comments, please don't hesitate to reach out to Lee or Allison at lee@lawschooltoolbox.com or allison@lawschooltoolbox.com. or you can always contact us via our website contact form at lawschooltoolbox.com. Thanks for listening, and we'll talk soon.